I'm just going to dive straight in, if that's okay, because we're running a little bit late. What I wanted to do with you today was as much for us as hopefully for you. I really wanted to explore the whole idea of community and where the barriers to decarbonisation might lie, and kind of pull through to these sustainable development goals as well, and see kind of what we feel about energy. So the first question I wanted to ask you very quickly was, what is community? Nice easy one to start with. So what does community mean? What is it? How do we define community?
A group of like-minded neighbours. Oh God, my Professor Short.
Give it to the dyslexic man in the room. Yeah. Any other kind of ideas about what community might mean? Or is?
This is like asking questions that just...
I know, I was just thinking the same thing. They were like, we thought we were going to sit here and watch a presentation. Okay, so let's move on to another one, maybe come at it from another angle. Who shapes and defines your communities? Who does that? Who makes up that fabric that is your community? Think of the town where you live or the village where you live. What is that community? We've been talking about community energy and communities all day. So what is this thing, community?
I think there's a sort of slight twofold to it from my point of view. And sort of from where I am at, in terms of probably my age, somebody 20, 30 years older might see it differently, but I see it sort of two strands. You've got kind of your community leadership that, depending where you live, may be more visible than others. So people like your parish councils, leaders of village halls and things like that, and then your residents. And obviously there's a disparity in engagement between leadership and residents, depending on where you live, I suppose.
And perhaps all those groups that make up the community, say your schools, maybe a church, your local businesses, even if it's a handful of, post office, a pub and a few village shops. Maybe you've got a really strong farming community, your playgroup is part of your community. Perhaps you've got a local health centre, that's your community too. And then, as you say, all those people who don't maybe come into the community in such a visible way. So when we're kind of thinking about how we access sharing the decarbonisation message, how do we go from the community, the local government, down to the parish councils, which may be those same 5 people who talk to each other and do all the stuff? How do we get from those 5 people to the rest of what is essentially, in reality, the community, and get an engagement at that level, at that kind of grassroots level? What kind of things matter to our community? Do we even know that? If you think of your own place where you live, what matters to the people who live there? What are their concerns and issues? Is it an affluent community? Do you live in a village of people who may be retired there? Do you live in a community where there are a lot of affordable homes and people who may be struggling financially, or maybe have difficulties in terms of a long commute and they're not really around or available at the weekend or in the evenings to participate in community discussions? So I think that's kind of what I want to throw out there at the back of your minds whilst we start to explore those challenges to decarbonisation.
Is it about communication? Is that what?
I think it is.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm just going to interject as well.
Yes, please do. Yeah.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about older gentlemen, in the 19th century or 20th century, we'd have communicated with parish magazines, church magazines, and that sort of thing would have come across. And there's a lot more decentralisation in the way of communication via newspapers. Now we're in what? I suppose that's where the internet comes in that. So the community within the internet but we're sort of, that's where your generation of communicating and, well, whether we communicate, you know, we're not so involved in that, and we try to. So at the present moment, there seems to be a disconnect.
So picking up and running with that, if you look at something that struck me that Ian said this morning when he did his keynote, and he said how he was introducing John Taylor, and he was saying how he keeps up to date with what John is doing on Twitter. So millennials, so anybody 40 and under who lives in your community, most of their community is actually online, and most of the conversations they're having might be on Facebook. If they're organising something literally within the community, it's through that they'll find out about it or be doing it. If you're younger, Snapchats, Instagram. Now all of these things...
20 seconds on TikTok.
Yes, or 20 seconds on TikTok, yeah. Climate change sucks, be here at this time. School strike. End of. No great kind of hyperbole and massive discussion.
Curveball.
Yeah.
So, do we need that communication, or can the person who said about 5 people being important in this room, can we just have 5 people doing it?
That's not fair when it's a village that's 8,500.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that's where it becomes unrepresentative.
Exactly.
And you know, I've been involved in education like you guys have, and in community volunteer field as well. How do you get those marginalised people, those disenfranchised people, whether they're young or old or wherever, how do you get those involved? And how we know that Roots Up action is going to be best. We know that that sense of ownership in your locality is going to be best. That's why these community energy schemes are probably going to work very well. So, but it's really difficult when we've just spent 20 months isolated and people's communities are virtual communities and they may not be localised, whereas our answer, and if we go back to 25 years ago, act local, think global.
Yeah, Agenda 21.
You know,
Yeah.
it was such a long time ago that was first.
Yeah, it still holds true.
I'd just like to say, and it might be sort of, it's in me, but might be a little bit off topic. From my point of view, sort of where I live, it's not small, right? But so I live in Keswick, everybody does know the area. But I've lived there for 3 years now, and it's probably the most sort of community style place that I've felt that I've lived. I've lived sort of in and around Ipswich most of my life. But I still don't feel like there's much visibility. I know there's lots going on community-wise, but I don't feel like they're shouting about it enough, or if they are, I'm not seeing it. So it's the visibility of what's going on, what I could get involved in, and then potentially not so much in Kesgrave, but I think when I was younger and in the past, and for example, say at university age, kind of being involved in your community and being a driving force, you know, for what you want and what people in your age group want. That kind of network and way of working, and just to me, especially then, and still a little bit now, or quite a lot now, it seems just quite fuddy-duddy. I think.
Okay, yes, I hear what you're saying. And I think people on parish councils who are of an older adult, because they're retired, so they're able to give their time to it, would probably be thoroughly delighted to have younger blood come in. So straight away there's a disconnect here, isn't there? Sorry, I'll come back to that.
I've just recently been involved in trying to recruit a couple of cleaners for a village hall, and we were discussing how we advertise. And we found about 8 channels through which we were going to advertise these vacancies. I'm not sure that there's a communication problem in the issue we're talking about. I think the problem is that most people think it's too big and just shut
That's
off.
great. Yeah. Yeah, that it's too, the whole problem is too huge
Is too
to deal
big,
with. Yeah.
Yeah, I think community is a very interchangeable word because it can apply in all sorts of different contexts, whether it's a parish or a university or a village or town. But I think what makes a community may be a shared sense of responsibility or a shared interest. And whatever that is, it's obviously, it can be a whole lot of different things, but it's that thing that brings people together to work together because they want to achieve something.
So part of what you're touching on there is leadership, in a sense of how do you deliver inspiring leadership to be able to create that sense of shared purpose. How do you kind of unlock that and bring people to that shared vision?
Yes, and if there's a shared purpose like having an efficient heating system or something like that, then that shared purpose needs to be communicated to everyone who might benefit. And right enough, a lot of people will be on social media and whatnot, but if you limit it to that, then you'll miss a lot of other people.
Yeah, well, no, yes, you wouldn't just do one line of comms, would you? You'd cover the whole.
Adapting to the variety of people.
Yeah, exactly, to your audience. Yeah, adapt to your audience.
So, can I ask the lady's name in the region? So, what's your experience then of trying to get that communication across? You said, what potentially stumbling blocks? It is it's the crux in what going forward.
It's a really huge conversation, isn't it? That's why I put it. One of the stumbling blocks that kind of is flashing up at the moment is people's perception, so their own rigid point of view, and how you get that information out into the public arena that is in an acceptable way for them to take it on board, so that they do feel as though they're taking ownership, rather than it being dictatorial or a hugely opposing opinion, or something that they perceive because hands up, but perhaps I would definitely have a left-green political leaning. That might put a huge amount of people off looking at anything that I want to write or say.
So that comes back to that sharing, regardless of.
At what level are you prepared to put yourself out of the way and listen?
So how would you feel, for example, how do you think something like this might work if the parish council were thinking, hey, a local energy system would be fantastic. We've had some initial feasibility studies done. Now we're going to approach the local schools, we're going to go to the PTA meeting, and we're going to not say we're doing it or we're not doing it, but we're going to give a presentation on the benefits of community energy. Would something like that, do you think, make it easier to access different sections of the community where you already have organised groups who are interested in this instance, their children and being involved with the school or being involved with the playgroup, where you have people who are already quite committed and engaged with community?
For me, I'm interested in something called deep adaptation and practical deep adaptation, and how we actually move forward in a massive way, which is way beyond where we've been talking today, way beyond. And the essential part of that is about community, and it just is, you have to build community in whatever way you do, and in terms of climate emergency, which we really are facing, it's about identifying all those different groups, all those different individuals in your locality, but it's having a completely different mindset. And that I'm struggling with. How do you do that? I'm really struggling with it.
Do you think some of the issues might not just be around people's views or positions, but might be around something as seemingly simple as time? I mean, we have this in our workspaces. Is there something perhaps around, you know, people thinking, I like the idea of this green energy project. I feel I could probably help a bit, but I'm just not sure I want to commit myself because I might get sucked in and end up having to do masses. So maybe I'll just kind of posh about on the sidelines and support it, but not actually put any time or of my time to it. Do you think there's a kind of fear of committing time in some instances, or am I just putting words into people's mouths?
No, I don't think so. I think what you were saying about deep adaptation, it's too big. That's, you know, it's just too, as you just said, it's too difficult. I can't comprehend it because I know I want to go there, and I'm feeling the same boat. I want to see a change and a more community-based sort of interactions going on, so you support each other, and that's where social care will come in. That's what we used to do. But it's that too big a concept.
Because I was kind of struck
It's a
by...
radical shift. It's a radical shift in how we think.
Yeah.
I was kind of struck by what you said earlier, so just whilst we snatched a few minutes before we came over here, so you're looking for somebody who can maybe help point you in the right direction. What are we going for? Are we going for air source heat pumps, or should we be thinking solar, or, you know, where should I be putting my energy? And if I got a consultant in or a project manager, I'd have to pay fees for that information, money that we might not have within the community. And yet, if you've got, well, how many people did you say lived in your, was it?
How many people?
Yeah.
2,500.
So of those 2,500 and all their relatives, there is definitely somebody within that grouping who maybe has project management skills, or so that kind of goes back to what Nick was saying about how do you access that, all of that resource that you have within your community and that knowledge that you have within your community, because it's unlikely that these people are going to step forward, isn't it? And it'll just end up being, you know, you guys working jolly hard, burning the midnight oil to get something in, which the whole community will benefit greatly from. So how do we sort of, in terms of barriers to implementing these things?
Well, it just so happens that on Wednesday, a professional project manager talked to the Village Hall Modernisation Steering Group about project management and planning of what we're doing. So there's an example. He lives in the village.
Perfect.
And,
yes.
Even
better.
Project managed Sizewell B.
Oh, I think he'll be all right then, won't he? I think you've got a good one there. Yeah.
But that's actually, we'll come back to community, because we had to talk to them with guys in Lewis and Totnes, I've heard mentioned. I know my mother lived in Mount Regis. There's schemes like this of just sharing individuals' expertise within a community. And like, I don't know, my dad was good at computers, so he said, I can mend your computer, and he got back, somebody came and did their garden. So it's going way back to a different way of trading, as it were. But I was thinking what you said about it being too big. If Thomas came to me and said, I can't get my head around this assignment, which he's going to do on Monday when I see the data, I will say, break it down.
Oh, fine.
So, but it's still too big to break down.
That's the problem of it being urgent and an emergency. You know, we need it done 20 years ago. You know, that's. I'm not the only one that faces that.
No, yes, I'm completely aware of that. But all I'm doing is trying to think of a solution, and my immediate idea was to break it down. But I know you're right. It's
And
just too.
then the answer would be to have a climate emergency audit of your skills in your locality, your community, whatever size, whether it's a parish or small town or whatever. You know, that's the start.
Which people might feel a bit
iffy.
angry about.
Exactly.
Yeah. Why are you trying to profile me and my abilities?
That'd be a big issue of how you know, that'd be another barrier, wouldn't it? That rather than it being, as I say, altruistic or for the benefit of all.
So I think something that's really helpful that's come out of the Suffolk climate plan is there's a whole pathway in there about working with community, and some of the funding that's been put into the plan will go towards that, but not in the ways that you suspect. It's not like a handout for projects, because there's other money for that. But this is to actually work on signposting. How do we set up systems and ways of communicating with each other, sharing across Suffolk, sharing our skill sets, our case studies, our resources, a little bit like Baber and Mid Suffolk have done today, which is amazing. They've done this 2-day conference on the run up to COP for the whole of Suffolk, which has opened up some of these conversations. We've met people we might not have met otherwise. We're having conversations where we may not agree with everything that's been said necessarily, but we can take away the bits that we think, that works for us in our community.
I was thinking it too big that's got me thinking.
It keeps coming back to the enormity of it all. Yeah.
I also think there are different communities that there's a need for individual approaches, because in some communities you can have perhaps retired professional people that are used to managing big projects or understand industry terminology, where you may have another younger community or less affluent community that doesn't have that level of expertise or the level of understanding. So the way you approach both communities would be different.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's also bringing it down to a local level, showing maybe examples of good practice. And as you said, with Elmswell, you've got the heat pumps, you've got all the underfloor heating that they've done. Come to another village hall that's maybe the same age, but maybe serves a smaller community.
Yeah.
But then saying, well, okay, maybe the Elmswell project is too big for what you can offer, but here's a scaled down version. And here's somebody who's been through the process that can tell you the potholes to avoid. And
that's the signposting bit, and that's why Suffolk County Council have tried to go down that route, because it's trying to match people up. Like you say, if I'm in Ipswich and I'm in a block of densely packed flats, my take of trying to get everybody in my block of flats engaged in community energy, suddenly my community is my block of flats. That's what I need to address, which is a completely different thing from other areas.
That's when I was going to say too big, it comes back to both of that. Break down the community into smaller bits and have a common goal. And it's that communication. And I was just thinking that one of the slides, I can't remember, I think it was the guy from Lewis, about Essex and having their energy, and he had I can't remember.
Yeah, had Colchester and Saffron Walden.
All of those sort of joining up to
Yeah.
communicate. But it was something like that. But it's maybe that, and then your block of flats links to the next block of flats, and that's energy sharing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine.
You said you were going to.
So, I don't mind your butt, so feel free to butt in. So what other kind of barriers do you perceive, other than that, the communication piece and obviously the financial aspects? We've looked briefly at the intellectual resource, accessing intellectual resource to actually do this. In terms of having a strategy, how many of you guys know if you have a neighbourhood plan or some kind of plan for your parish curtilage? So neighbourhood plans came out about 10, 12 years ago, which were an opportunity for communities to say what they wanted in terms of development for their parish. Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a great example, because I think there has been some disappointment in neighbourhood plans' capacity to actually change the course of events.
Yes.
And, I think, hopefully that might, evolve a little further to where neighbourhood plans have more teeth. But unfortunately, planning systems in a bit of flux at the moment. But just going back to community and scale, I think sometimes we tend to see an enormous problem that demands an enormous solution, and actually sometimes the solution to the enormous problem isn't an enormous solution, it's lots of small steps. And I think we need to be a bit humble about our capacity to change the world, but be realistic about what we actually can do, in quite a small way, because that will matter. And I think it's convincing people of that. Yeah.
Yes, that you don't have to be all out.
Yeah.
So maybe we're almost there. Yeah.
Very shortly, Councillor Atkinson will be starting.
Thank you. So maybe small, positive steps to build capacity and confidence to kind of build on and move forward. A little bit like the net zero journey itself, 2050 or 2030, we're not suddenly going to arrive there in one big blob. It's got to be done over time. So.
You can run. Bit neat.
Ew. And I think that sort of came across quite nicely when you looked at, where was the project? He said it loads, didn't he? The chap from Somewhere Well? No, not Well.
That's all.
Yes. But that's kind of how they did it, didn't they? They started with looking at air source heat pump just in one part of their village hall and the sports centre, the leisure centre. And then 10 years later, they were like, okay, yeah, we're good with this works, we know how to do this, we've done this before. And now they're sort of really incredibly ambitious, but in a way that is going to be successful. They're building 10 affordable homes on a shared energy network and running a community pub. But that's not something that they just dove straight into. They've slowly built up that sort of internal knowledge and that community knowledge. But of course, if you look at the timeline of all of that, you're talking kind of 15 years between, if not slightly more, from when they started that process to getting to where they are now. And obviously that, in 15 years' time will be in 2036. So, so that scalability and going back to the speed. So moving forward in a bite-sized way, but keeping the pace going across the whole of the region. And I think better. But just to let you know, with all of this, we're going to take this back into the university. It's going to form part of the project, if that's all right with you, for students to be able to look at it and see what kind of things community, yourselves, in terms of a focus group, what sort of things you think are the challenges and barriers. Thank you, sorry. We're good, we're done.